This entry was found in the diary of a Red Ball Express driver. August 25, 1944. Near St. Lo, Normandy. The rain falls in sheets, turning the ground to soup beneath our boots. Jimmy's transmission whines as I downshift, the rear wheels sliding in the mud. My 6x6 GMC is loaded with 2,500 pounds of 80-octane aviation fuel headed for Patton's tanks, somewhere near Chartres. They gave us red circles to paint on our trucks yesterday. Red Ball Express, they called us. Rush delivery. Priority cargo, keep 'em rolling, they said. No sleep required. 3 days ago I was handling laundry detail. Now I'm driving a 5-ton truck through France with enough fuel to vaporize a small village. Jackson beside me hasn't spoken for 30 miles. Just stares at the road, flinching whenever we hear aircraft. They pulled us from every corner of the service. Cooks, clerks, laundrymen. Put us in these trucks and pointed east. General Patton needs fuel, the captain said. The Third Army is advancing faster than anyone thought possible. Without you boys, the whole damn offensive stops cold. I'd never heard of Patton before Normandy. Now his name hangs in the air like scripture. The man who would end the war if only he had enough fuel to keep his tanks running. I've been awake for 36 hours straight, and the broken white line down the center of this road keeps dissolving into strange patterns. The MPs stand at every crossroads, waving us through, their faces blurring in the rain. "Tout de suite," they shout. Immediately. Always. Immediately. The convoy stretches ahead and behind as far as I can see through the fogged windshield. They say there are 6,000 trucks running this route now, 75% of us colored boys. The Army finally found a use for us, not in combat, but in keeping the combat supplied. I don't mind. The bullets fly less frequently back here, though the Luftwaffe still makes appearances. Yesterday, 3 trucks from the 35 80th Quartermaster Company were strafed near Dreux. The driver beside me swerved off the road when the first plane came in low, his truck rolling into a ditch, 50-gallon drums spilling across the field. We kept moving. Orders are to never stop. Night driving is the worst. Cat-eye headlights barely cutting through the darkness, the roads unfamiliar and cratered. The white sign with a red ball points the way at each fork. Last night, Private Wilson from South Carolina drove his Jimmy off a bridge that wasn't there anymore. Just gone. Bombed away. They pulled his body out this morning. The captain marked him as a non-battle casualty and assigned a new driver to the truck after the engineers winched it from the river. The roads back to the beaches are littered with broken vehicles, tilted into ditches to clear the way for the endless flow headed east. The mechanics work miracles with limited tools and almost no parts, performing surgery on engines in the rain, swapping components between vehicles to keep the maximum number moving. The rule is simple. If it breaks down, push it aside and keep the convoy moving. Nobody gets left behind, but nothing stops the flow. September 2nd, 1944, near Rams. My hands shake so badly I can barely hold this pencil. Haven't slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in a week. The roads are getting worse the further east we push. The Germans are retreating, but they're leaving presents. Mines, booby traps, bridges blown to splinters, and still, we drive. I lost another man from my platoon yesterday, Reynolds. He fell asleep at the wheel outside Soissons, drifted off the road and hit a mine that the engineers had missed. The blast woke me from my own half-sleep at the wheel. I watched his truck burn through my side mirror, too scared to stop, too numb to feel much beyond a dull recognition that it could have been me. The convoy commander came over the radio, voice flat. "Keep 'em rolling. Reynolds is being attended to." That was all. We're covering nearly 400 miles round trip now, and the Army keeps extending our route as Patton pushes his armor deeper into France. The Third Army blew through the Seine on August 19th and hasn't stopped. I heard a lieutenant say they're advancing nearly 40 miles some days. We're the umbilical cord. Without us, the Army withers and dies. Each truck in my convoy carries enough fuel to keep a Sherman tank running for another day of combat. The tankers greet us like saviors when we arrive, their machines gasping on empty. The official orders limit our speed to 25 mph, with 60-yard intervals between vehicles. Nobody follows these rules. We drive as fast as the road allows, sometimes exceeding 60 mph on the straight stretches, bumper to bumper in long unbroken chains. The pressure is immense. Every hour of delay means Patton's advance might stall. And God help you if you're the reason George Patton has to stop. Yesterday we passed a column of German prisoners being marched west. Their uniforms were caked with mud, faces gaunt. One of them, a young officer who couldn't have been more than 20, watched our convoy with hollow eyes. I wondered what he was thinking, seeing hundreds of trucks roaring past, each loaded with the means to push his comrades further back toward Germany. It was the first time I felt the true scale of what we're part of, not just driving trucks, but feeding a machine that is systematically dismantling the Wehrmacht. At the fuel depot near Reims, I saw my first dead German up close. He was sprawled beside a knocked-out Panzer IV, uniform still neat despite the dark stain spreading across his chest. Someone had taken his boots. It struck me as obscene, though I couldn't say why. We're all just men caught in something larger than ourselves. I look at my hands on the wheel and wonder what his hands were doing when the bullet found him. September 15th, 1944. Outside Metz. The Third Army has finally stopped, but not by German design. We've outrun our supply lines. Even with the Red Ball Express pushing around the clock, we can't bring forward enough fuel, ammunition and food to sustain Patton's pace. The harbours in Normandy are too far back now. Nearly 400 miles of rough road separates us from Cherbourg, and the railways are still being repaired. The frustration among Patton's staff officers is palpable when they meet our convoys. They pace like caged animals, checking manifests, demanding more than we can deliver. General Patton says he could be in Germany in a week if he had the fuel, a major told me yesterday, his voice tight. Every hour we wait, the Germans strengthen their defences along the Siegfried line. I wanted to tell him about drivers falling asleep at the wheel, about the Luftwaffe strafing our columns, about axles breaking on roads never meant for this volume of heavy transport, but I just nodded and unloaded my cargo. We lost 3 more trucks yesterday to mechanical failure. The rain hasn't stopped for days. Mud coats everything, works its way into engines, clogs filters, ruins brakes. My Jimmy coughs on startup now, the engine protesting after 2,000 miles without proper maintenance. We're supposed to service these vehicles every 500 miles, but there's no time. I check the oil when I can. Top off fluids during the 10-minute breaks we're allowed every 2 hours. Otherwise, we drive until something breaks or we reach our destination. The scale of what we're moving becomes clearer with each trip. Yesterday, my convoy alone delivered 30,000 gallons of fuel, 80,000 pounds of ammunition, and enough K-rations to feed a regiment for 3 days. Multiply that by hundreds of convoys, and you begin to understand the true measure of modern war. Not in rifles or courage or even tactics, but in the steady flow of material. The side with the most trucks wins. A letter came today from my mother in Detroit. She works on a production line now making M4 Sherman parts. We're working double shifts, she wrote. The foreman says they need every tank we can build. I wanted to write back and tell her that I've seen where those tanks go, grinding forward across France, burning through the fuel I deliver, some of them ending up as scorched hulks by the roadside. But what would be the point? There's a web connecting us all, the factory workers, the drivers, the tankers, the infantry, each turning our small gears in the vast machinery of this war. Lieutenant Harper gathered us at sundown. Patton stalled at the Moselle River, he said. The Germans have destroyed the bridges and are dug in on the far side. We're being rerouted to support his crossing operation. Maximum effort, gentlemen. The old man is impatient. The old man. That's what they call Patton, as if he were a force of nature rather than a general. I've still never seen him, though his presence looms over everything we do. September 29th, 1944. Somewhere near the Moselle. I found blood on my steering wheel this morning. My own from cracked and bleeding hands raw from constant gripping. The medics have nothing to offer but gauze and tape. Wrap 'em and keep driving, the corpsman said. You've got calluses coming. They'll be fine eventually. Meanwhile, I leave bloody fingerprints on everything I touch. The rains have intensified, turning the approaches to the river into swamps. Engineers work around the clock, laying steel matting and gravel, trying to create firm ground for the endless stream of trucks. My Jimmy sank up to its axles yesterday, and it took 3 other trucks with winches to pull it free. The mud here isn't like anything I've seen before. It clings and sucks, as if the land itself is trying to slow our advance. Rumours ripple through the convoy stops. Patton's Third Army is now facing 5 panzer divisions near Metz. The Germans have finally managed to establish a defensive line, and the running advance of August is now a grinding battle of attrition. The fuel and ammunition we're hauling is no longer feeding a rapid advance, but rather an intense siege. The casualty clearing stations we pass are overflowing. Ambulances bog down in the same mud that traps our trucks. I saw General Patton today, finally. His convoy passed us heading toward the front, the distinctive 4-star plate on his vehicle visible even through the rain. He stood in an open jeep despite the weather, rainwater streaming off his helmet, his face set in what the men call his war face, a permanent scowl that suggests barely contained fury. He looked right at our column as he passed, eyes scanning the endless line of muddy trucks. For a moment, I thought he might stop, might walk over and say something to us, the men who have driven themselves to exhaustion keeping his army moving. But he just nodded once, sharply, and then his jeep accelerated away toward the sound of distant artillery. The scale of American production becomes more apparent with each passing day. The depots at Cherbourg are mountains of supplies, ammunition stacked higher than houses, medical supplies by the ton, fuel dumps stretching over acres. And it all moves forward through us, through the narrow pipeline of the Red Ball Express. The Germans captured a supply depot near Nancy last week. 3 days' worth of stockpiled ammunition. The officer who told me this laughed without humor. They were more excited about the cigarettes and coffee than the bullets, he said. Shows you where their priorities are now. My body aches constantly. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. The vibration of the truck has numbed my hands and feet until they feel like they belong to someone else. And still, we drive. The Red Ball never stops. When a man can no longer function, he's simply replaced. There's always another driver waiting, another body to put behind the wheel. The machine is relentless. October 12th, 1944. Forward Supply Depot, Metz sector. 3 of us went looking for Harrison today. He disappeared 2 days ago while returning from a supply run to the 4th Armored Division. His truck was found abandoned near a crossroads, engine still running, no sign of blood or struggle, just empty. The MPs were useless, too busy directing traffic at critical junctions to mount any sort of search. So Jackson, Williams and I took it upon ourselves during our mandatory 8-hour rest period. We borrowed a jeep and retraced his route. About 5 miles from where his truck was found, we discovered his body in a drainage ditch. Single bullet wound to the head, clean and precise. His wallet and boots were missing, but his dog tags were still around his neck. Sniper, most likely. The Germans have been leaving small teams behind as they retreat, hidden in the dense forests that line the roads, tasked with disrupting our supply lines. We wrapped him in a tarp and brought him back. The company commander seemed more annoyed than anything else. "That's not your job," he said. "We have recovery teams for that." But those teams are overwhelmed, and Harrison would have lain in that ditch until the spring thaw if we hadn't gone looking. They listed him as killed in action, rather than the usual non-battle casualty that most Red Ball deaths receive. Small dignity, but it felt important somehow. The fighting around Metz has intensified. Patton's forces are attacking the city from multiple directions, trying to encircle the German defenders. The weather continues to work against us. Rain turning to early sleet, visibility poor, roads deteriorating further. Artillery fire is now audible from our forward supply dumps, a constant distant thunder that forms the backdrop to everything. The strain is beginning to show throughout the Red Ball system. Drivers fall asleep while standing, hallucinate from exhaustion, snap at the slightest provocation. I saw 2 men from the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company nearly come to blows over a misplaced fuel nozzle yesterday. The officers pretend not to notice as long as the supplies keep moving forward. Discipline has become a luxury we can't afford. Our trucks are failing faster than they can be repaired. Of the original 50 vehicles in my company, only 29 remain operational. The rest have been cannibalized for parts or abandoned along the route. The 6x6 GMC was never designed for this kind of punishing schedule. Continuous operation over broken roads with double the rated cargo capacity. Transmissions fail, axles snap, engines seize, and still we push them beyond their limits because there's no alternative. A captain from Patton's headquarters staff rode with me yesterday, hitching forward to the front. He told me the general has been raging about the supply situation. 300 tanks sitting idle for want of fuel, he said, staring through the windshield at the endless rain. Do you know what Patton could do with 300 tanks if they had full tanks? I didn't answer. What could I say? That we're killing ourselves trying to keep his army supplied, that the human body, like the trucks we drive, has limits that cannot be overcome by will alone? The captain didn't expect an answer anyway. He dozed off after an hour, head lolling against the window, another exhausted man in a war of exhaustion. November 8th, 1944. Near Verdun, the Red Ball Express is dying. Slowly, without ceremony, the great supply operation that fed Patton's advance across France is being phased out. The port of Antwerp has finally opened, cutting hundreds of miles off our supply lines. The French railways are being restored section by section. The need for our endless convoys diminishes with each passing day. They're reassigning drivers now, sending us to different units, different duties. Some will stay in transportation. Others will return to whatever jobs they held before the desperate days of August. Jackson received orders to join a quartermaster unit near Paris. Williams is being sent to an engineer battalion building bridges over the Rhine. I'm still waiting for my reassignment, driving supplies to increasingly distant depots, the intensity and urgency fading from the operation with each trip. It feels strange, this winding down. For months, the Red Ball Express has consumed every waking moment, defined our existence. The constant movement, the pressure, the knowledge that armies depended on our arrival, it became the rhythm of our lives. Now, that rhythm falters, replaced by the more measured pace of a maturing front. The improvised emergency of August has evolved into systems and procedures, predictability replacing desperation. The statistics are staggering, now that we can step back and see what was accomplished. Over 412,000 tons of supplies delivered, 6,000 trucks in constant motion, thousands of men driving impossible schedules across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. The Red Ball Express became legendary even as it operated, a miracle of logistics that sustained the fastest advance of American arms in history. I met a tank commander from the 4th Armored yesterday, a lieutenant with a 1,000-yard stare and hands that never stopped moving. "For you Red Ball boys saved our asses," he said, offering me a cigarette. "We'd be stranded somewhere east of Paris if not for you." He told me stories of the advance, German units in full retreat, villages liberated in minutes as Patton's armor roared through, the breathtaking pace of those early days when it seemed like nothing could stop the Third Army's drive toward Germany. "We only stopped when the tanks ran dry," he said. "And then you boys would show up like magic, and we'd be moving again." Patton's forces have finally taken Metz after weeks of brutal fighting. The city fell on November 1st, though pockets of German resistance still hold out in the outlying forts. The cost was high, over 50,000 casualties in the Third Army since September. The lightning advance of August has been replaced by the grinding attrition of November, each mile now measured in blood rather than gasoline. I received my new orders this morning. I'm being assigned to a transportation company supporting the advance toward the Siegfried Line. Still driving, still moving supplies, but no longer part of the Red Ball Express. The desperate improvisation of those 81 days will never be repeated. We did what was needed in a moment of crisis, and now more sustainable systems take our place. Before turning in my Jimmy for the last time, I drove to a high point overlooking the sprawling supply depot near Verdun. Trucks still moved in their endless patterns below, but the frantic energy had dissipated. I sat there as dusk fell, watching the headlights trace patterns in the gathering darkness. I thought about Harrison in his unmarked grave, about Wilson in his watery tomb, about Reynolds consumed by fire. I thought about the thousands of men who drove themselves beyond exhaustion to keep Patton's army moving, whose story would likely be a footnote in the histories of this war. The Red Ball Express will be remembered, I think, but not the men who made it run, the drivers who saw France through bloodshot eyes and trembling hands, who navigated by instinct when fatigue blurred their vision, who delivered the lifeblood of the advance one dangerous mile at a time. We weren't the glory of this war, but we were its sinew, its connective tissue, the silent current that powered the more visible victories. Tomorrow, I'll drive a different truck on different roads. The war grinds on, shifting now from rapid movement to grueling siege as winter approaches, and the Germans stiffen their resistance. But for 81 days in the late summer and fall of 1944, I was part of something extraordinary, a desperate improvisation that became legend, an emergency measure that changed the course of the war. We fueled Patton's army on no sleep and blind faith, and somehow it was enough. December 19th, 1944, near Bastogne. The world has turned upside down. 3 days ago, the Germans launched a massive counter-offensive through the Ardennes forest. They've broken through the American lines, creating a huge bulge in our front. Patton's Third Army, which was preparing to attack the Siegfried Line further south, is now pivoting rapidly northward to counter this threat. The roads are chaos. Military police direct endless streams of vehicles, some retreating westward in disorder, others pushing east toward the developing battle. Snow falls steadily, turning the already treacherous roads into white ribbons, barely visible in the gathering dusk. The temperature has plummeted, and my breath forms crystals on my scarf as I drive. They've reactivated elements of the Red Ball Express. Not officially, not under that name, but the same desperate energy infuses this new supply operation. Trucks commandeered from across the theater, drivers pulled from whatever duties they were assigned, all to feed Patton's audacious maneuver. The Third Army is attempting something military historians will study for generations, a 90-degree turn of an entire army in winter conditions to strike the flank of the German advance. I found myself back in a jimmy 2 days ago, part of an emergency convoy heading for a crossroads town called Bastogne. The 101st Airborne is surrounded there, holding a critical road junction against overwhelming German pressure. Without ammunition and medical supplies, they'll be overrun within days. Our convoy is one of dozens trying to break through to them before it's too late. The familiar rhythm returns instantly. The hypervigilance, the battle against fatigue, the constant calculation of fuel, distance, and time. My new transportation company was absorbed wholesale into this emergency operation, our previous assignments forgotten in the face of this new crisis. Even the segregation that defined Army life has temporarily dissolved. White and colored drivers work side by side, united by the urgent knowledge that men are dying while waiting for what we carry. We drive with our lights on now, despite the risk. The blackout restrictions have been lifted given the emergency. The blue-white beams catch swirling snow and the occasional group of infantry trudging westward, their faces hollow with defeat. They don't look at our trucks as we pass. Some of these men have been running for days, their units shattered by the sudden German onslaught. Rumors spread at every stop. German commandos in American uniforms infiltrating our lines, paratroopers dropping behind our positions, entire regiments surrendering or destroyed. The roads themselves have become battlefields. German advance units appear without warning, setting up roadblocks or ambushes. 3 trucks from our convoy were lost yesterday to a German patrol that appeared suddenly from a forest road, their Panzerfausts making short work of our unarmored vehicles. We scattered, some drivers continuing east, others turning back. I found myself alone on a secondary road, navigating by map and instinct through the snowy landscape, determined to reach the beleaguered defenders of Bastogne. Patton himself addressed some of the assembled drivers at a forward depot near Arlen. He stood in the swirling snow, leather gloves creaking as he gestured forcefully, voice carrying across the yard. "You men are delivering victory," he said, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Every gallon of fuel, every box of ammunition, every bandage you deliver is keeping American boys alive and killing Germans. Drive like hell, and don't stop for anything or anyone." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "I've ordered the Third Army to relieve Bastogne by Christmas. We won't fail those men, and neither will you." I saw something in his eyes then that I hadn't noticed during our brief encounter months ago. Not just the famous determination or the barely contained fury, but something deeper. Patton understood what many didn't, that wars are won by supply as much as by strategy. The greatest general is powerless without the humble truck driver, the anonymous quartermaster, the forgotten engineer. In that moment, standing in the snow with his army racing against time to prevent disaster, he acknowledged the invisible machinery that made his victories possible. The next morning, my truck loaded with ammunition and medical supplies, I headed toward Bastogne. The roads were increasingly clogged with vehicles, ambulances bringing wounded back from the front, reinforcements moving up, artillery being repositioned. Military police at every intersection waved Red Ball trucks through without hesitation. Priority cargo, maximum urgency. The echoes of August and September reverberated through this new crisis. The artillery grew louder as I approached the front, a continuous rumble punctuated by sharper cracks of tank fire. The sky to the east flickered with distant explosions despite the daylight. Somewhere ahead, the 101st Airborne was fighting for survival, surrounded on all sides by German forces that outnumbered them considerably. Somewhere ahead, Patton's armor was driving hard through the snow, attempting to break the encirclement before it was too late. I thought about the circular journey I'd taken, from the beaches of Normandy to the gates of Germany, then suddenly back westward, as the front line buckled and bent under German assault. The war we thought was nearly won in September had roared back to life in December. The confidence of autumn had given way to the desperate improvisation of winter, and once again, everything depended on trucks, on fuel and ammunition delivered in time, on drivers pushing beyond exhaustion, on the humble, grinding logistics that made victory possible. As I approached a checkpoint 5 miles from Bastogne, an officer waved me down. "Red Bull?" he asked, using the old name that had become shorthand for priority supply runs. I nodded. "Follow the lead jeep," he said. "They're waiting for you. Every minute counts." Ahead, I could see the flashes of artillery fire illuminating the low clouds, could hear the rumble of tanks moving into position. Patton's counteroffensive was gathering momentum, building toward the climactic moment when the siege would be broken and the German advance finally halted. I checked my cargo one last time. Ammunition for rifles, machine guns and mortars, plasma and bandages for the wounded, even a small Christmas package program that someone at headquarters had thought to include. Then I put the Jimmy in gear and followed the jeep forward, toward the sound of guns, toward the men who waited for what I carried, toward the hinge point of history that Bastogne had become. Once more I drove the lifeline between the arsenal of democracy and the men who converted its output into victory, 1 dangerous mile at a time. January 4th, 1945, Luxembourg City. We broke through to Bastogne the day after Christmas. My truck was in the 3rd convoy to reach the battered perimeter, held by the 101st Airborne. The men who greeted us were gaunt, exhausted, many wounded but still fighting. They swarmed over our vehicles before they'd even stopped moving, unloading supplies with desperate efficiency, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "Thought you boys had forgotten about us," a sergeant said as he directed the unloading of my ammunition. His uniform was stained and torn, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. Heard Patton was coming but didn't know if he'd make it in time. I told him about the Third Army's pivot, about the convoys running day and night to support the counteroffensive. He nodded, unsurprised. "Patton," he said, as if the name explained everything. "The battle continues, but the crisis has passed. The German advance has been blunted, their spearheads contained. Patton's counterattack from the south, combined with the stubborn defense of Bastogne, has turned what could have been a catastrophe into what may yet become a victory. The weather has cleared, allowing Allied aircraft to pound the exposed German columns. The momentum has shifted again, this time in our favor. I've made 6 supply runs to the Bastogne area in the past 10 days, watching the situation transform from desperate defense to cautious advance. The roads remain treacherous, snow and ice making each trip a battle against physics as much as against the enemy. German artillery targets the main supply routes, adding the terror of random death to the more mundane dangers of winter driving. Yet the convoys continue, a ceaseless flow of materiel feeding the armies as they slowly push the Germans back toward their original positions. This emergency supply operation lacks the formal structure of the original Red Ball Express, but its spirit remains the same: improvisation, endurance, and the quiet heroism of men pushing machines and themselves beyond their limits. Trucks still break down, drivers still fall asleep at the wheel, the mud and snow still claim their share of casualties, yet the supplies get through because they must. Yesterday, I drove past the aftermath of a German air raid on one of our forward supply dumps. Trucks burned like funeral pyres, illuminating the night with ghastly orange light. Bodies lay scattered across the loading area, some still clutching clipboard manifests or unloading straps. The Luftwaffe had struck with their remaining strength, targeting our logistics rather than our combat units, a tacit acknowledgement that in this war of production and supply, the humble depot can be as strategically valuable as the fortified position. As I helped recover what supplies could be salvaged, an officer from Patton's staff arrived to assess the damage. He walked among the burning vehicles with clinical detachment, calculating losses and replacements with cold efficiency. "How quickly can this be operational again?" he asked the depot commander. Not if, but how quickly. The question contained the fundamental American approach to this war. Obstacles exist to be overcome, problems to be solved, timetables to be met. The general expects fuel and ammunition by morning. Make it happen. We've learned from the original Red Ball Express. The emergency convoys running to support the Bulge counteroffensive are better organized, better maintained, more sustainable. Drivers are rotated more frequently. Vehicles serviced according to proper schedules, routes marked more clearly and guarded more heavily. The desperate improvisation of August has matured into something more systematic, still urgent, still demanding, but no longer chaotic. The cost remains high. 2 trucks from my new company were lost to artillery fire near Wiltz yesterday. The drivers killed instantly. Another slid off an icy road into a ravine, the driver breaking both legs and waiting 6 hours for rescue in the freezing cold. The medical examiner found ice in his boot when they finally cut it away from his frost-bitten foot. Men still fall asleep at the wheel, still push beyond human endurance because the alternative, failing to deliver what the front line needs, is unthinkable. Yet there's a sense of culmination now, a feeling that we're witnessing the beginning of the end. The Ardennes offensive was Hitler's last gamble, and it failed. The German war machine lacks the fuel, ammunition, and manpower to mount another major offensive. Their factories lie in ruins, their oil refineries reduced to rubble, their transportation network systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. They fight on with diminishing resources while we grow stronger with each passing day. I think often of that first hectic month of the Red Ball Express, the mad dash across France, the sense that history itself was accelerating, that the war might end by Christmas if only we could keep Patton's tanks fueled. That optimism faded in the autumn mud around Metz, was buried in the winter snow of the Ardennes. Yet the fundamental truth remains: our ability to deliver overwhelming material superiority to the front line, to replace losses almost instantly, to feed, fuel, and arm our forces without interruption, has made victory inevitable. The Germans couldn't maintain the offensive for more than a few weeks. Their tanks ran dry. Their infantry exhausted their ammunition. Their wounded overwhelmed their medical services. Meanwhile, we pivot entire armies, redirect mountains of supplies, and absorb losses that would cripple any other force. This isn't just about courage or tactics or even leadership, though all play their part. This is about the system that delivers the tools of war where and when they're needed, the invisible machinery that transforms industrial might into battlefield dominance. I am a small gear in that machinery, one driver among thousands, moving one truck in an endless convoy that stretches from the factories of Detroit to the forests of the Ardennes. Yet I've seen with my own eyes how essential this work is, how the fate of battles and campaigns, and perhaps the war itself, has rested on our ability to deliver, to keep Patton's armor fueled, to resupply the surrounded defenders of Bastogne, to ensure that American firepower never falls silent for want of ammunition. As I write this in a temporary barracks in Luxembourg City, trucks continue to move outside my window, their headlights cutting through the winter darkness. The convoy never truly stops. It merely evolves, adapts, changes its name and structure as circumstances demand. The Red Ball Express may be officially disbanded, but its spirit lives on in every priority cargo, every urgent delivery, every driver pushing through exhaustion to reach his destination. We are the circulatory system of this vast war machine, carrying its lifeblood to where it's needed most, and as long as we keep flowing, victory remains only a matter of time. February 12th, 1945. Near Trier, Germany, we've crossed the German border. The Jimmy's wheels now roll on the soil of the enemy homeland, moving through villages where civilians watch with hollow eyes and carefully blank expressions. The children stare at our trucks with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some of the older ones give the Hitler salute out of habit, then quickly lower their arms when they realize what they're doing. The Third Army is advancing steadily, moving northeast toward the Rhine. Patton's desire to be the first Allied commander to cross the river is an open secret, discussed around supply depot campfires and in mobile mess halls. The man's ambition remains as fierce as ever, his army reflecting his impatience to end the war by summer. The supply convoys feel the pressure of his pace, the constant demand for more fuel, more ammunition, more of everything needed to maintain momentum. This is different from the heady days of August, when we raced across France through territory recently abandoned by retreating Germans. Now we move through their homeland, where every stone house could conceal a sniper, every forest might hide an artillery observer. The roads are frequently mined or booby-trapped, bridges destroyed with methodical thoroughness. Engineers work around the clock to maintain our supply lines, building bypasses and temporary spans, clearing unexploded ordnance, keeping the arteries open. I drive now with a rifle within easy reach, a habit formed after 2 trucks in our convoy were ambushed by Volkssturm militia last week, old men and boys in civilian clothes, fighting with desperate fanaticism for their dying Reich. The supply system has evolved again. The Red Ball Express is now a distant memory, replaced by more formal permanent logistics networks. Yet its legacy endures in how we operate, the emphasis on speed, on improvisation when necessary, on the absolute priority of keeping the front lines supplied no matter the cost. April 18, 1945, near Leipzig. The war is ending. Everyone feels it. German resistance crumbles more quickly with each passing day. Entire units surrender rather than face Patton's relentless advance. We're delivering more food and medical supplies now, fewer munitions. The Third Army moves so quickly that our maps become obsolete almost as soon as they're issued. Patton's push eastward has been extraordinary, even by his standards. The Rhine crossing in late March opened the heart of Germany to his armor, and he's exploited the opportunity with characteristic aggression. My supply convoy now travels roads lined with surrendering German soldiers, their faces showing relief more than defeat. Yesterday we passed a column of liberated Allied prisoners walking westward in ragged groups. Their sunken eyes and skeletal frames told stories beyond words. We stopped, sharing rations and cigarettes, listening to tales of captivity that made our hardships on the Red Ball Express seem trivial by comparison. I think often of how far we've come, from the desperate improvisation of the Red Ball Express to the final drive into Germany. The lessons learned during those frantic days in August and September 1944 transformed how the Army handles logistics. Future wars will study what we accomplished. May 8, 1945. Outside Munich. It's over. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. The Third Army has advanced further east than any Allied force, reaching parts of Czechoslovakia before being ordered to halt. Patton's ambition to push all the way to Berlin was thwarted by politics rather than German resistance, much to his vocal frustration. As I make what may be my final supply run of this war, I reflect on the Red Ball Express and its place in history. For 81 days, we kept Patton's army moving when conventional wisdom said it couldn't be done. We were mostly colored troops, relegated to service duties, yet we performed one of the most critical missions of the European campaign. The statistics are staggering. 193 tons of supplies delivered, thousands of trucks running day and night, countless lives risked and lost on dangerous roads. But numbers don't capture what it felt like to drive those endless miles, fighting exhaustion and fear, knowing that the fate of battles depended on our arrival. I'll return to America soon, to a country that may never fully understand what we accomplished here. But I'll carry with me the knowledge that when history accelerated in the summer of 1944, I helped supply its momentum. When Patton's army raced across Europe, I was part of the invisible machinery that made it possible. We fueled victory on no sleep and blind faith, and somehow it was enough. If you want to learn more about these unsung heroes who kept Patton's tanks rolling through Europe, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell. Next week, we'll explore more forgotten stories from W2 that changed the course of history.